I've started a new channel called Lunila Tales. Please subscribe and watch my best stories there. Link is in the description. The feed went live across 10,000 worlds at once. The image shook as if even the cameras were terrified, showing a kneeling man on a platform of alien steel. Around him stood the warlords of Craxus, towering lizard-like creatures with armor made from the bones of conquered species. Their leader raised a jagged blade, his voice echoing in a language that sounded like rocks grinding in a furnace. This is what happens to those who defy the Council of Dominion. The blade swung, a flash of silver under the alien suns, and the man's head fell before anyone on Earth had time to blink. His name was Thomas Hale. Diplomat, peacekeeper, father of two. Now a corpse broadcasted live, not just to Earth, but to the entire galactic network. Billions watched in stunned silence as the warlords laughed and raised their weapons in triumph. On Earth, in the United Nations headquarters, the silence lasted only 3 seconds before somebody muttered the words that would soon rewrite history. So, do we press the button now or later? The room erupted into chaos. Half the council screamed for war, the other half for diplomacy, but in the middle of it all sat General Marcus Gray, calm as a monk at a funeral. He reached for his coffee, sipped, and said with absolute deadpan calmness, "I suppose we wake him up." Every head turned. "You can't be serious," someone whispered. He looked at the screen where Thomas Hale's lifeless body was being dragged away like trash. His voice stayed cold. Dead serious. Somewhere beneath the lunar surface, in a facility so secret even most world leaders didn't know its real location, alarms began to sound. A chamber bathed in red light hissed open, spilling out vapor like the breath of a dragon. Inside sat a man, or perhaps something that used to be a man, shackled by restraints made of alloys not even the aliens knew existed. "Designation Reaper," the AI voice announced. "Status: active." The figure lifted his head slowly, eyes glowing faintly as though he had been dreaming of battlefields. He looked around, smirked, and spoke his first words in 12 years. "Who woke me up before breakfast?" Back on Craxus Prime, the alien warlords gathered in their council hall, laughter rumbling like distant thunder. "Earth will surrender in days," their leader roared. "These apes have no weapons worth fearing. Their fleet is small, their technology laughable. We executed their diplomat and what did they do? Nothing. They are weak." One of the younger warlords shifted uncomfortably. "Reports indicate there was something called the Silent War 50 years ago. Whole empires vanished. No witnesses. No survivors. Some say Earth was involved." The leader waved a clawed hand dismissively. "Old myths to frighten hatchlings. No primitive world could end empires." Meanwhile, deep in the lunar base, Reaper swung his legs off the stasis bed and reached for a battered leather jacket like a man preparing for a night out rather than an interstellar war. Around him, nervous scientists handed him reports, weapons schematics, mission briefings. He ignored them all until one trembling lieutenant blurted, "Sir, they killed Thomas Hale." Reaper paused mid-step. He turned slowly, eyes narrowing just slightly. Then he chuckled, low and cold. "Big mistake." In the War Council on Earth, diplomats argued furiously while Reaper stood in the corner sipping coffee he had stolen from someone's desk. One ambassador slammed the table. "We must appeal to the Interstellar Tribunal. There are laws, protocols." Reaper interrupted without looking up. "The only law out here is whoever has the biggest stick. And right now they think it's them." The council fell silent. Someone finally asked the question, trembling on every tongue. "Can you stop them?" Reaper smiled faintly. "Stop them? No. I'm going to make them wish they never learned we existed." When Earth's official message went out to the Alien Council, it sounded polite, almost diplomatic, but between the lines dripped venom and threat. It read, "To the Honorable Warlords of Craxus, we acknowledge your display. In response, Earth will be sending a representative to discuss terms. Please prepare adequately." The warlords laughed again when they read it. "Send whoever you want, little apes," their leader said. "We will crush them too." But far away, in a hangar hidden beneath layers of rock and steel, Reaper boarded a ship blacker than the void itself. Its engines purred like a predator ready to pounce. Soldiers and engineers watched in awed silence as he passed, carrying no weapon anyone could see, yet every man there felt as though death itself had walked by. As the ship lifted off, General Marcus Gray watched from the control room, his voice calm as always. "God help the Warlords," he murmured. "Because nothing else will." Out in the cold reaches of space, the Reaper set his course for Craxus Prime. He leaned back in the pilot's seat, humming an old Earth tune, as though he were heading not toward war but toward a casual meeting with old friends. They killed a human today. They thought Earth was weak. They were about to learn what fear truly meant. The ship glided through the emptiness of space like a shadow that had decided to grow teeth. Inside, the Reaper stretched his legs out on the console and stared lazily at the stars slipping past. Most soldiers would have been rehearsing battle plans, meditating, or at least polishing their weapons. Reaper scrolled through a menu of breakfast options instead, muttering to himself about the tragic lack of pancakes in military rations. The onboard AI tried to brief him about enemy fleet positions until he silenced it with a single raised eyebrow, which for some reason shut the machine up completely. Back on Earth, the Council had not stopped arguing. Half the diplomats wanted to warn the aliens that Earth was deploying its deadliest operative. The other half insisted the Reaper was a myth kept alive by old soldiers with too much whiskey in their systems. General Marcus Gray said nothing, drinking coffee so black it looked like it had been scooped from a neutron star. He knew the truth. He had seen the Reaper in action once, years ago, when an entire pirate fleet vanished in a single night. No survivors, no debris, just whispers that something had hunted them in the dark. Meanwhile, the Reaper found a bottle of orange juice in the ship's storage locker and held it up to the light like it was a rare treasure. "Well, at least they stocked the essentials," he murmured. He was dressed in simple black combat fatigues, no medals or markings, the kind of outfit you buried people in after they annoyed you. The ship's AI finally gathered courage and spoke again. "The alien warlords have superior numbers, advanced weapons, planetary shields, and orbital defenses. Statistically speaking, your odds of survival are—" Reaper cut it off by sipping orange juice and saying, "Statistically speaking, you talk too much." The AI paused for several seconds before muttering in binary that this was going to end badly for someone. On Craxus Prime, the Alien Council was enjoying what they called a victory feast. Dozens of species had been conquered by the Craxus Dominion over the centuries, and each victory ended with the same ritual. They ate, they drank, and they told stories about how invincible they were. The execution of Thomas Hale had become their favorite tale, repeated with dramatic flair and occasional mockery of human anatomy. The Supreme Warlord, a creature with 4 arms, 6 eyes, and exactly 0 sense of humor, slammed his claw on the table to demand attention. "The humans will surrender soon. They will send diplomats crawling on their knees, begging for mercy. We will broadcast their humiliation to the entire galaxy." Another warlord, slightly less convinced, asked if it was wise to provoke an entire planet like this. But the Supreme Warlord only laughed, a sound like rocks exploding in a furnace. "What can they do? They have one small fleet, no allies, no empire. They are nothing." Back aboard his ship, the Reaper replayed the footage of Thomas Hale's execution. He watched it twice, eyes expressionless. Then he shut it off and stared at nothing for a long time. There was a history between them, though few knew it. Hale had been the only diplomat who once convinced the Reaper to stand down during what could have become a planetary massacre decades ago. Hale had believed in peace, even when the universe laughed at the word. Now he was gone, and the universe was about to stop laughing. As the Reaper's ship crossed into enemy space, alien sensors detected it instantly. Craxus control stations reported the intrusion to the Council, but the Supreme Warlord simply waved a claw. "One ship? Destroy it." Dozens of alien interceptors launched into the void, bristling with plasma cannons and antimatter warheads. They formed a blockade around the approaching vessel, demanding surrender in 3 different languages. Inside the ship, Reaper set down his orange juice, leaned forward, and pressed exactly 3 buttons on the console. That was all it took. The alien interceptors suddenly lost power, their weapons going offline, engines sputtering like dying candles. One by one, they drifted helplessly into the void. The alien pilots screamed over comms, demanding to know what was happening, but their systems only replied in strange human phrases like "out of order" and "insert coin to continue." Reaper had hacked their entire fleet in under 30 seconds and programmed the systems with what he claimed was authentic Earth humor. Back at Craxus Command, officers stared in disbelief as every ship in their blockade displayed a giant floating message on their main screens. Property of Earth Tech Support. Please hold. The Supreme Warlord roared in rage, ordering every remaining ship to fire at will. Plasma cannons lit up the darkness, turning space into a storm of blue and red streaks. The Reaper's vessel danced between them with impossible precision, never slowing, never missing a beat. It was like watching a ghost waltz through lightning. As the battle raged outside, the Reaper finally spoke to the terrified alien pilots over the comm system. "This is your first and last warning. Go home. Tell your masters I am coming." Most of the surviving ships retreated without further orders. The rest tried one last desperate volley before the Reaper's ship vanished from their sensors completely, slipping past defenses like smoke through fingers. On Craxus Prime, panic began to replace laughter as reports flooded in. Entire defense grids were going offline. Communications failed without explanation. Surveillance satellites showed only static before going dark. The Supreme Warlord slammed his claws on the council table again, demanding answers. Who is this attacker? What weapon can do this? An older warlord, one who remembered ancient whispers about the silent war, spoke slowly. "I think it is not a weapon. It is a who." The Reaper's ship descended toward the planet's surface, cutting through storm clouds like a falling shadow. Alien civilians scattered in the streets below, pointing at the sky as alarms howled across cities. For the first time in centuries, the Craxus Dominion felt something they had long forgotten. The council chamber of the Craxus Dominion looked like chaos dipped in fire and polished with panic. Alien generals screamed over each other while the Supreme Warlord bellowed demands for answers no one could give. The once invincible empire had just watched its orbital defenses collapse like children's toys, and the soldiers who had never known defeat were discovering a new and unpleasant emotion called uncertainty. Every report came with worse news than the last. Fleet destroyed. Command centers offline. Defense grids corrupted. One panicked officer shouted that the invader had rewritten their planetary alert system so that instead of blaring alarms, it now played something called elevator music. The Supreme Warlord's eye twitched as the faint sound of cheerful human jazz echoed through the command hall while their empire unraveled. Somewhere above the planet, the Reaper strolled down the ramp of his ship as it settled in the middle of the Craxus capital like it had every right to park there. His boots crunched on alien pavement while thousands of soldiers surrounded him, weapons trembling in their claws. He looked up at the towering spires of the city, a place built from the spoils of centuries of conquest, and for a moment he almost admired the architecture. Then he noticed every building had been designed to look like it was scowling. Typical alien dramatics, he muttered to himself. The Supreme Warlord himself arrived, towering over everyone on a platform carried by slaves. He pointed one enormous claw at the lone human standing in the square and roared for his troops to fire. Hundreds of plasma rifles unleashed blazing torrents of light straight at the Reaper. The air shimmered with energy, the pavement erupted into fountains of molten stone, and smoke covered the square in seconds. When it cleared, the Reaper was gone. Soldiers looked around in confusion until a voice behind them said, "You all need better aim." They spun to see him leaning casually against a broken wall, not a scratch on him. He had moved faster than their eyes could track, a shadow among explosions. Before they could fire again, every weapon in their claws beeped once and shut down. Small holographic messages appeared above each rifle in bright human letters that read Error 404, Target not found. Panic spread through the troops as they threw their useless guns aside and backed away. The Supreme Warlord roared again, demanding someone fix the weapons, the defenses, the entire planet if necessary. No one moved. Even the council members shifted nervously as the Reaper strolled toward them with the same pace a man might use when shopping for groceries. Inside the council hall, the warlords tried to regain some dignity. One of them, his voice shaking but defiant, demanded to know who this intruder was and what he wanted. The Reaper looked around the grand chamber with its banners of conquest and its thrones carved from the bones of extinct species. Then he gave a smile that was not friendly. "What I want," he said softly, "is an apology." The council stared at him. Of all the demands they had expected, surrender, wealth, power, this simple request seemed almost absurd. The Supreme Warlord bared his teeth in what might have been amusement. "You want us to apologize?" The Reaper's voice stayed calm. "You killed Thomas Hale. You laughed while his children watched from Earth. That was your first mistake. Your second was thinking no one would come for you." The Supreme Warlord leaned forward, towering over the human, and sneered. "And if we refuse?" The Reaper looked at him for a long moment, then glanced at the massive war map glowing in the center of the chamber. With one flick of his wrist, the entire display changed, revealing every secret fleet location, every weapons cache, every hidden base in the Dominion. The council gasped in shock as the map pulsed red, one installation after another vanishing from existence in real time. "That," the Reaper said, "is what happens if you refuse." Across the Empire, alarms blared as weapons depots exploded, fleets burned in orbit, and entire command networks collapsed under cyber attacks launched hours ago by the same man now standing in their council chamber sipping from a flask he had produced from nowhere. He had not come to negotiate. He had come to dismantle them piece by piece. The younger warlords began shouting at each other, panic erasing centuries of arrogance. Some demanded surrender, others called for full-scale retaliation, but none could deny the simple fact that the Dominion was bleeding faster than they could respond. Meanwhile, the Reaper seemed almost bored. He wandered over to a table stacked with alien delicacies and poked at something that looked suspiciously like it might still be alive. He asked the nearest soldier if there was any salt. The soldier fainted on the spot. The Supreme Warlord tried to regain control of the situation. He ordered the planetary AI core to lock down every system, only to be told by trembling technicians that the core now answered exclusively to something calling itself Tech Support Reaper Edition. All attempts to override it resulted in the system replying with cheerful human phrases, like "Have you tried turning it off and on again?" Then came the worst moment yet. Every communication screen across the planet lit up with the same image. The Reaper, leaning casually in their own council chamber, announcing to the entire Dominion that he was here to collect payment for Thomas Hale and every other victim of Craxus' arrogance. The whole Empire watched as their invincible leaders sat frozen, unable to respond. On distant colonies, rebellions erupted within hours. Conquered species saw the chaos and realized the Dominion could bleed after all. Planetary governors reported riots, defections, even entire fleets switching sides as the myth of Craxus' supremacy crumbled in real time. Back in the council hall, the Reaper finally stopped smiling. He walked to the center of the chamber, surrounded by warlords who suddenly looked much smaller than before. His voice carried the weight of something colder than rage. "You thought killing one man would break Earth. Instead, you woke me up." The Supreme Warlord tried to speak but hesitated when the chamber lights flickered, then died. The massive war map vanished. The floor rumbled as explosions echoed from the distance, closer and closer. Someone shouted that the planetary shield had just gone offline. The Reaper turned toward the council doors as they burst open, soldiers rushing in with news of yet another disaster. He paused only long enough to toss his empty flask aside before saying 3 quiet words that sent a chill through every alien heart in the room. This was mercy. Then he walked out as the council chamber fell into chaos, leaving behind the sound of alarms, panicked voices, and the creeping realization that the warlords of Craxus had just lost control of everything they ruled. The warlords of Craxus had never known fear until now. Their fleets were burning, their planetary defenses lay in ruins, and their vaunted council chamber reeked of smoke and humiliation. Yet as the Reaper vanished into the chaos outside, the supreme warlord clung to the last scraps of arrogance like a drowning man clutching a sinking ship. He ordered every assassin, every mercenary, every secret weapon they possessed to hunt this human down and crush him before the entire empire fell apart. His voice thundered through the command channels, but even as the orders went out, he could hear the panic in his own officers' voices. Some barely bothered to hide it. Others were already talking about evacuation plans and surrender conditions. Meanwhile, the Reaper walked calmly through the burning streets of the capital as though nothing around him mattered. Alien soldiers scattered from his path, despite outnumbering him 1,000 to 1. They had seen their weapons fail, their defenses crumble, and their leaders humiliated, and now none of them wanted to be the next example of what happened to anyone foolish enough to stand in his way. Fires crackled in the distance as Craxus gunships spun out of the sky in plumes of smoke, victims of their own sabotaged systems. Civilians cowered in doorways, watching the strange figure who had come out of nowhere to unmake an empire. It was then that a cloaked figure stepped out from the shadows and approached him with deliberate slowness. The Reaper stopped, studying the newcomer. He was clearly not a soldier. Too thin, too cautious, with the hunched posture of someone who had lived most of his life behind screens rather than weapons. The figure lowered his hood to reveal pale, scaled skin and large, intelligent eyes that darted nervously to the rooftops as if expecting someone to shoot him at any moment. "I am Drask," he said, voice low. "I designed the Dominion's energy core. I know its secrets. I want to help you destroy it." The Reaper raised one eyebrow. "Help me out of the goodness of your heart, I suppose." Drask shifted uncomfortably. "Let's say the Warlords and I have disagreements. You want the Dominion crippled. I want them ended. Our goals align." The Reaper studied him for a long moment, then turned to keep walking. "Fine. Talk while we move." As they made their way through the capital, Drask explained that the Dominion's entire military power relied on a single titanic energy core buried deep beneath the surface of Craxus Prime. It powered their planetary shields, their weapons, even the wormhole gates that connected the Empire. Destroy it, and the Dominion would collapse overnight. But reaching it would be almost impossible. It was hidden beneath layers of defenses, and the Warlords would never allow anyone near it while they still breathed. The Reaper listened in silence until Drask finished, then asked one question. "Weaknesses?" Drask nodded quickly. "There is one. The core overheats if its coolant regulators are shut down. The system was designed with redundancies, but I built a backdoor into the control network. I can get you inside." The Reaper glanced at him sideways. "And you just happened to build this secret flaw into the most important system in your empire out of pure professional pride." Drask hesitated. "Let's just say the Warlords never paid me enough to erase my conscience." Before the Reaper could reply, the sound of engines roared overhead. Dozens of Dominion gunships appeared from the clouds, weapons locking onto their position. Soldiers poured into the streets from every direction, cutting off escape routes. The Supreme Warlord had wasted no time sending everything he had after them. Drask froze in terror, but the Reaper simply sighed as though this was becoming inconvenient. He pulled a small device from his belt and flicked it into the air. For a moment nothing happened. Then every gunship above them lost power at once, engines dying mid-flight. They spun out of control, smashing into each other in midair before crashing into the streets like falling meteors. Soldiers scattered in panic as explosions rocked the capital once again. The Reaper grabbed Drask by the arm and dragged him through the smoke before reinforcements could arrive. They disappeared into the underground tunnels beneath the city, moving toward the energy core while chaos consumed everything above. But as they descended deeper into the tunnels, the air growing hotter and the walls trembling with the pulse of alien machinery, Drask began acting strangely. He grew quieter, his eyes flicking toward the shadows too often, his answers coming slower when the Reaper asked questions. Something about his story didn't add up, and the Reaper knew the look of a man hiding something. It was confirmed when they reached the outer chamber of the core. Drask moved to a control panel with too much confidence, his claws dancing across alien keys as massive doors rumbled open to reveal the energy core itself, a towering column of light and machinery surrounded by walkways and coolant pipes. "There you go," Drask said quickly. "Shut down the regulators, and the whole thing will go critical. The Dominion will fall." The Reaper stepped forward but stopped when he caught sight of movement in the shadows above. Gun barrels. Soldiers. A lot of them. He turned slowly to see Drask backing away with an apologetic look. "I told them you were coming," Drask admitted, voice trembling. "The deal was my freedom in exchange for you. I had no choice." The Reaper stared at him, then glanced at the ring of soldiers closing in from every direction. Plasma rifles hummed as they powered up. Drask swallowed nervously and added, "For what it's worth, I think they'll kill me too after this." The Reaper smiled faintly, though there was no humor in it. "Then you should have made a better deal." Before the soldiers could fire, the entire chamber plunged into darkness. The Reaper moved like a shadow among shadows, his figure barely visible as soldiers fired blindly in panic. Muzzle flashes lit the chamber in stuttering glimpses of chaos, aliens dropping one by one, systems sparking, walkways collapsing. When the lights flickered back on, every soldier lay unconscious or worse, weapons smoking beside them. Drask stood frozen in shock as the Reaper stepped over the bodies and reached the control panel. "You still want to destroy the Dominion?" the Reaper asked without looking at him. "Then start rerouting the coolant systems like you said. We have 72 hours before they launch that planet killer at Earth, and I intend to end this empire before then." Drask hesitated, then slowly moved to obey, realizing too late that he had just betrayed the wrong man and might not survive what came next. The energy core chamber was a cathedral of alien technology, a towering cylinder of pulsing blue light surrounded by an endless maze of pipes, conduits, and catwalks suspended over what looked like a bottomless pit. The air was hot and thick with the hum of power that made the walls themselves tremble. Drask moved quickly between control panels, his claws tapping commands that shut down defense systems one by one. He worked with the precision of someone who knew this place better than anyone alive, though the occasional nervous glance toward the Reaper made it clear he had no idea what his own future held. Above them, alarms screamed through the Dominion capital as the Supreme Warlord ordered every available force to converge on the energy core. Soldiers, assassins, drones, and war mechs were pouring through the city toward the underground facility, determined to kill the human before he tore the heart out of their empire. Orbital fleets had been recalled, planetary defense cannons retarget, and mercenary clans promised entire continents if they succeeded. The full wrath of the Dominion was coming, and time was running out. The Reaper moved along the catwalk toward the primary coolant controls, while Drask rerouted power through auxiliary systems to mask what they were doing for as long as possible. The scientist explained that once the coolant valves closed, the energy buildup would reach critical mass in less than 3 hours. The core would go into meltdown, annihilating itself and anything within 100 kilometers. More importantly, without the energy core, the Dominion's fleets, shields, and weapons would all go dark. As Drask talked, the Reaper barely listened. He kept watching the entrances above, scanning the shadows, waiting for the inevitable response. He knew the Dominion would not simply let this happen. The real fight was coming, and it would be ugly. They arrived at the central platform where massive coolant conduits fed into the core like the veins of some mechanical beast. Drask moved to the controls, muttering to himself about thermal regulators and bypass algorithms, while the Reaper planted explosives along the access bridges to slow down anyone coming after them. Then the first wave hit. Dozens of Dominion shock troopers stormed the upper levels, rappelling down cables with plasma rifles blazing. Drask yelped and dove behind a console while the Reaper moved with inhuman precision, picking up one of the fallen rifles and dropping troopers with single shots before they even saw him move. He set off the first explosive charge, collapsing part of the catwalk in a roar of fire and metal that sent more soldiers plummeting into the depths below. But for every enemy he killed, 2 more seemed to take their place. The Dominion was throwing everything they had into this fight, and even the Reaper could feel the pressure mounting. Drones swarmed in from the ventilation shafts, spitting plasma fire across the platforms. A war mech the size of a small building crashed through one of the access tunnels, shaking the entire chamber as it leveled its cannons at the Reaper. He sprinted along the catwalk as the mech's cannons roared, explosions chasing him across twisting metal bridges. He dove behind a coolant tower, planted another explosive, and detonated it as the mech advanced. The blast tore through its leg joints, sending the giant machine crashing sideways into the pit in a storm of fire and falling debris. Drask screamed over the noise that the coolant systems were shutting down, one by one. The core was already beginning to glow brighter, the pulse of its energy speeding up like a racing heartbeat. But the Dominion forces kept coming. The second wave brought assassins armed with stealth cloaks, flickering in and out of sight as they tried to get close enough to gut the human who had humiliated their empire. The Reaper fought them in brutal silence, blades flashing as he killed them one after another on the narrow catwalks, sending bodies tumbling into the abyss below. Then came the Supreme Warlord himself, descending on a command platform surrounded by elite guards in heavy armor. He carried a massive plasma halberd crackling with enough power to cut through starship hulls. As he landed on the main platform, he pointed the weapon at the Reaper and roared that the human would die here along with his dreams of vengeance. The Reaper stepped forward through smoke and fire, his expression unreadable. Around them, the battle still raged as Dominion troops clashed with automated defense drones the Reaper had reprogrammed to fight for him. Explosions shook the chamber as the energy core grew hotter, brighter, closer to catastrophic failure. The Supreme Warlord charged, swinging the halberd in wide arcs that left molten scars across the catwalks. The Reaper dodged with impossible speed, striking back with stolen blades, explosives, and anything else he could get his hands on. Their fight raged across the platforms as soldiers and drones battled around them, the entire chamber a storm of fire, metal, and death. Drask screamed that the core was reaching critical levels, but neither the Reaper nor the Supreme Warlord slowed. The alien Warlord fought with the strength of a creature who had crushed 100 worlds, but the Reaper was faster, colder, utterly relentless. He used the environment against his enemy, luring him onto collapsing bridges, blinding him with steam from ruptured coolant pipes, cutting him with shards of falling metal. At last the Reaper planted one final explosive on the support struts beneath the platform. As the Supreme Warlord lunged for the killing blow, the charge detonated, collapsing the entire section of catwalk and sending the alien leader plunging into the abyss below. His roar of rage faded into the depths as fire consumed him. The remaining Dominion forces hesitated, leaderless and panicking as the Reaper rose from the smoke. He looked at Drask, who was staring at the control readouts in terror. "The core is going critical," Drask shouted. "We have to leave now or we die with it." The Reaper nodded once and triggered the final sequence. All coolant regulators shut down at once. The energy core began to scream, a rising wail of power building toward inevitable destruction. They fought their way out of the chamber as Dominion troops broke and fled in every direction, the Empire's last defenders abandoning their posts in the face of certain annihilation. The Reaper and Drask reached the evacuation tunnels as the first shock waves ripped through the facility, fire chasing them through collapsing corridors while the entire planet seemed to shake itself apart. When they finally reached the surface, the capital was in chaos. Dominion fleets were falling from the sky as power systems failed across the planet. The energy core deep below was moments from tearing itself apart, and the entire empire felt the fear of extinction closing in around them for the first time in centuries. The explosion of the energy core ripped through Craxus Prime like the wrath of an angry god. Entire mountain ranges split apart as molten fire erupted from the depths, swallowing cities in waves of destruction. The planetary shields failed first, blinking out one by one as the power grid collapsed, followed by the Dominion fleet in orbit losing control and spiraling into the atmosphere like burning meteors. The once proud capital of the Empire was reduced to a storm of fire and falling steel within minutes, and from space the planet looked like it was cracking open under the weight of its own defeat. The Reaper and Drask had barely escaped aboard a stolen transport ship as shock waves tore through the sky behind them. The scientist sat slumped in the corner of the cabin, staring at the floor with the dazed expression of someone who had just watched the Empire he served crumble in a single afternoon. He had betrayed the Dominion, betrayed the Reaper, then betrayed the Dominion again when survival demanded it. Now he was alive, but his entire world was gone. The Reaper sat opposite him, calm as ever, cleaning a blade as though they had not just run from a planet-destroying explosion. His eyes were cold, unreadable, fixed on some distant point beyond the ship's walls. Outside, the burning wreckage of the Dominion fleet fell toward Craxus Prime like shooting stars marking the death of an age. Back on Earth, the news spread like wildfire. Images of the collapsing Dominion capital transmitted across the galaxy from fleeing civilians, intercepted Warlord broadcasts, and automated satellites told the story clearly enough. The empire that had ruled through terror for centuries was gone. Conquered species erupted in celebration across 100 worlds, tearing down statues of the Warlords, hunting down their soldiers, reclaiming cities that had been under alien rule for generations. Planetary governors surrendered in droves, begging Earth for protection from the chaos that followed the fall of their masters. In the United Nations headquarters, diplomats and generals watched the reports in stunned silence before the room erupted into cheers. Someone actually opened a bottle of champagne, while ambassadors from dozens of liberated worlds called in to offer alliances, trade agreements, and unending gratitude. General Marcus Gray only nodded once at the news before returning to his coffee. He knew better than most that victories like this always came with shadows attached. The Reaper returned to Earth 2 days later aboard a military cruiser sent to pick him up from the edge of Dominion space. Crowds gathered in cities across the planet to celebrate the man who had brought down an empire, though most of them only saw glimpses of him on giant screens as he walked calmly down the cruiser's ramp with his usual expression of faint annoyance, like he had simply taken out the trash. Reporters shouted questions about how he had done it, what weapons he had used, whether he was even human, but he ignored them all, disappearing into the depths of the military complex without a word. Drask was taken into custody by Earth authorities, though not before negotiating asylum in exchange for every scrap of technical knowledge he possessed about the Dominion's fleets and weapons. He tried to speak to the Reaper before being led away, perhaps to apologize or perhaps to justify his betrayals, but the human never even looked in his direction. A week later the United Nations held a massive ceremony declaring the fall of the Craxus Dominion and the liberation of its former territories. Speeches were made, banners raised, alliances signed. The galaxy, for the first time in living memory, looked toward a future without the shadow of the Warlords looming over it. But the man who had made it all possible was not there to see it. The Reaper sat alone in a dark briefing room miles beneath the surface of Earth, feet up on the table, staring at a stack of classified reports. He had been offered medals, parades, entire planets if he wanted them, and he had turned it all down without hesitation. Glory meant nothing to him. The job was done. That was enough. General Marcus Gray entered the room carrying 2 mugs of coffee, setting one in front of the Reaper before sitting across from him. You saved the planet, the general said. Maybe the whole galaxy. People are calling you a hero. The Reaper sipped his coffee. They should try setting lower standards. Gray smiled faintly. What will you do now? The Reaper shrugged. Go back to sleep, I guess. Until someone else decides to wake me up for their next disaster. But before the general could reply, an intelligence officer rushed into the room carrying a datapad, face pale. Sir, we have a situation. Both men looked at the screen. It showed fragments of intercepted transmissions from deep space, signals coming from regions long thought dead and empty. Something was moving out there, something massive, ancient, and not part of the Dominion or any known empire. Gray frowned. Survivors? The officer shook his head. Not survivors. Something older. Something worse. For a long moment there was only silence in the room as the signals played on the screen, low and pulsing like the heartbeat of a sleeping giant. Then the Reaper stood, finishing his coffee before setting the mug carefully on the table. Good, he said at last. I was getting bored. Far across the galaxy, on a ruined Dominion world where the fires had barely died, alien scavengers moved through the wreckage of a collapsed temple once dedicated to the Warlord. Deep beneath the rubble they uncovered a massive sealed chamber covered in dust and markings so old even the Dominion had not known what lay there. As the scavengers worked to open it, the walls began to glow with faint red light, and something inside the chamber stirred for the first time in eons. The galaxy celebrated its freedom, unaware that a far older shadow had just opened its eyes. And somewhere on Earth, the Reaper prepared himself for whatever came next, a faint smile on his lips as though he had been waiting for this moment all along.